Okay. Good afternoon, April. How are you? Hope you're good. Okay. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good evening, wherever you're coming in from. We're just gonna wait for more people to file in, but we're going to get started soon. So great to be here. We've got a fantastic topic. So we're talking about AI in background screening, which is actually a really hot topic right now. And so I'm really glad to be here with two companies, Checkmate and also Background Check Advisory, with Anton Watson and Sloat. And so we're going to get, I'm not sure, you can just make sure that you're muted. You can keep the video on or off. That doesn't really matter. And then we'll just give another couple of minutes. Okay. Sure. All right, Nancy, we'll just wait another minute and we'll get started. All right, you know what, we'll get started. Okay, so welcome everybody. So people will be joining us hopefully soon. Just want to welcome everyone to this webinar, AI disruption in background screening, what HR leaders must get right. And so this is a really good topic. And so we've been running webinars for the last month or so, and we have a whole bunch more coming in the next couple of months also. And so we're joined today by two companies. Background Check Advisory with Anton Watson and Checkmate with both Sloat. And so these webinars are all done with HR tech companies from around the world. And so both Anton and Will are in different parts of the world. They're in Auckland, New Zealand, and also London. Right?
That's
right. For all my fellow Canadians, London, England, not to London, Ontario. So I just want to make that clear. They're both very, very different places. Okay, so just want to welcome you, everyone. If you want to just transition the slide. All right. So Background Check Advisory is with Anton Watson, and obviously Checkmate, their background screening software platform. They're actually a new entrant here in the North American marketplace, and so I want to thank them for being here. And so yeah,
good to be here.
So just general housekeeping. We are recording this webinar. We're going to have some notes that we're taking, and we'll be sharing those with everyone. We also have a chat, so please chime in the chat. Maybe write your comment and thought. We have a Q&A feature, and so we'll be taking questions later. So if you want to jot down your question in the Q&A feature, please do. I have a slide. We'll share the slides also after the webinar in the email tomorrow that I'll send out. And then we'll also be sharing some other valuable content also. Okay. So, so if anyone knows me, they know that I like value, practical insight and experience based, and so that's what we're trying to do here. This is not a demo. It's not an AI talk. I think we've all had that, many times over. And this is not going to be something that is a silver bullet type solution. So this is meant to be a conversation, and so yeah, so I'm really excited to do this. Okay, so let's next slide, please. All right, yeah, Jim, have any questions? Maybe want to chime in the chat. Maybe indicate where you're calling in from. To what part of the world and what organizations you work for. But I want to welcome Anton Watson and Will Sloat, and I'm going to hand it over to both of them.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, good. Well, I was going to say good morning. That's what you always say when you say this, but I guess it's good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. So as Jeff said, my name is Anton Watson. I'm the director of the Background Check Advisory. And so I'm going to talk to you today really about background checking and the rise of AI and what it's really doing across the industry. For those of you that are wondering a little bit about the Background Check Advisory and my background, so I've been working in the background check industry for about 20 years now. I used to run the International Background Check Program for Bank of America, so I have a good understanding of what it's like to consume a background check product. And now I provide advice to those sort of organizations around, for example, what we're talking today, the risk of AI to background check programs and how you sort of effectively manage it. And I guess that kind of leads us nicely into the first slide that we're taking a look at. We've seen a lot of talk about AI and background checking, to Jeff's point in the introduction. A lot of people don't typically want to talk about background checking, but with the rise of AI, we're seeing people really wanting to have that conversation. And that is because they're sort of being attacked within their recruitment, onboarding, and background check processes with the rise of AI. So they're having to look at it as part of their nervous system of their hiring program. They're trying to figure out how it would, run more effectively. So Will, maybe if we move across to the next slide as well, if that's all right. What we're seeing with the rise of AI is a slightly different conversation when it comes to background checking. And you can see that on the slide. When you talk to people about background checking previously, it was very much around it's taking too long, it's the turnaround time, we need the person on the seat. Now that conversation has changed. It's more around we're being attacked, we need to stop it, how can we get this data quicker? So we're seeing a lot more automated solutions on the market. We're seeing a lot more data-driven solutions. We're seeing access to data becoming much easier. So you can get people's open banking information, their taxation records, their payroll records, which is helping to stop some of these risks. Because as you can see on the slide at the bottom, we're really talking about the fact that hiring fraud has evolved quite a lot. And we're going to talk about this with you today. We're actually going to show you how much hiring fraud has exploded because of the rise of AI. And what that has meant is that, as I was just mentioning, people want more of a conversation around background checking because they feel like the rise of AI is making their programs weaker, if anything. And so that's really why the topic is becoming more common, across people in the industry at the moment. Well, maybe we can jump to the next slide as well. And I think that's where I hand over to you to talk a little bit about what's happening in the news with it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I mean, really, the main reason around a lot of the evolution in terms of the actual back-end processes that we're using with background screening is due to this increased use of AI throughout the screening process. So everything on the screen probably isn't news to anyone on this call, but I think really, across the board, what we're looking at is fake candidates with, fake credentials, fake identities entering the top of the recruitment funnel, deepfake technology that's used in video interviews. Even like last year, the DOJ reported coordinated attacks from foreign individuals using foreign identities. I guess really as AI becomes more advanced, more readily available, what we're used to seeing as, edge cases are really starting to become the norm. And so that really takes us to kind of this AI paradox of, the efficiencies gained through introducing AI aren't really being met with the same efficiencies in compliance. So you have, I guess, really, AI efficiencies in various parts of your recruitment cycle, kind of automating some of those mundane, manual, heavy tasks, along with AI making mistakes, whether that's unconscious bias, flaws in the way that you've actually set up those automations, and then also AI making deception really as easy as it has been before with things like deepfakes, falsified documents, AI generated resumes and CVs.
Right.
So the first question here for the group would just be, where's your biggest challenge in background screening happening right now?
I think that poll is live now on the system. Right?
Yeah, it is live. So hopefully people see it. Do people see it? Hopefully they do.
Turnaround time for Nancy.
So far we have one vote each for the A and one for C. So there's only 2 votes. So, yeah.
Quite common, I think, Will, to see that, right? Knowing the risks and how to mitigate them. Turnaround time still coming up, which is interesting. And
yeah.
I think you mentioned, Jeff, some for C there as well, understanding how AI impacts hiring and screening, right? Which is good, I think, Will, because that'll lead us on to really what we want to talk about today. So it's interesting to hear. I know we're a smaller group, so it just gives us some idea of. It looks like it's pretty mixed. It looks like people want to understand the risks and how to mitigate them, turnaround time for sure, and understanding how AI impacts hiring and screening, which is good because that is what we're going to go and cover with you and sort of show you as much as we can in the webinar how that's actually happening across the industry at the moment, right? So maybe that's where Will, I can jump in and talk about this next slide, which we're talking about the fact that background checking really is complex. And I think we often find when we have these conversations with people about background checking that it's more complex than people realize. And so we sort of talk about this slide a little bit like the background checking game. There are a lot of different people involved. So you've got the recruiter. And so the recruiter usually is looking for fast hires. So that's why someone, I think, mentioned turnaround time. Their focus is not on risk. Their focus is very much on placing someone. You've got the job seeker. I mean, their focus is not on background checking. Their main aim is to get the job. They want to make sure that it's done quickly as well, and they want it to be done fairly. You then also got fraudsters down on the right. Those people are trying to bypass all of these programs, and they are now using AI to do that, and very effectively. You've then got background check providers, so people like Checkmate. Their job is to make sure that everything is done quickly, accurately for you, compliantly. But they do work to a level of effort, so they're not the employer. And so that's the next person in this game, right? The employer. The idea for them is that they want to hire safely and with confidence. And then you've often got regulators, well, you've always got regulators and different laws, rules, and regulations that people need to adhere to. So it's a complex network that is involved in background checking, and we often don't spend any time talking about that. But I think you want to talk about that, especially with the rise of AI and how people are beginning to bypass or infiltrate all of these different areas of a background check program. So that leads on nicely to the next question, right? Which is, why do companies have background check programs? And this is probably not a poll question, but it's just something that, if you're listening today, that you would want to ask yourself for your own organization. Why do you actually have a background check program in place? And most organizations will have different reasons, but the broad reason is that you are trying to protect your organization, or you're trying to know who you are hiring. But what we're seeing is the increase of AI fraud throughout the hiring timeline. And so that's what we're going to take a look at here, is how AI is changing the 6 or the 7 stages of recruitment and onboarding. And some of this, I think, people on the call will have seen. Some of it maybe you have not seen, or you may not be aware of. So the first stage that we're seeing a change with AI and background checking and how it's disrupting it is the creation of the resume. it's no surprise that people are using AI to boost their resumes, but we're actually seeing far greater problem than boosted resumes. We are seeing completely fraudulent resumes that are being created, for example, every job that a company would have advertised on their website. So you put into an AI program your basic details, and then it creates a resume that matches the job on every role that's advertised on a website. We've done that, and it was very surprising, the prompts that AI was giving us. It was actually prompting us to commit fraud. It was giving us made-up company names that wouldn't be picked up as not being a legitimate organization. It then went on to tell us how we could put white text in our resume that would then be picked up by an AI program that would push your application to the front of the queue. And you could just keep going on around that particular piece of the background checking journey. And so there's been a lot of conversation around that, about whether or not people are just optimizing their application and when it becomes AI fraud. And so that's something, again, for everyone to sort of think about as a takeaway today. In your own background check programs or your hiring programs, are you aware of the amount of fraud that is probably happening at the front end of your onboarding and your recruitment processes? And do you have any tools available to help you spot what people may be doing that is beyond optimization of their job application? The next thing that we see sometimes at stage 2, and some of these stages sort of move around, but often the next stage you might get in a job application process is for you to take an assessment. That's becoming very common. But what is also very easy to do in today's AI-driven world is to download AI programs that will sit those assessments for you. And so we have some really strong examples of people using that. There's lots of forums on Reddit where people are recommending which AI tool you should use to bypass the assessments that you're being put through. It knows to get you 75, 80, 85% so that you're not flagging alarm bells that you're getting 100%. And unfortunately, the more people are using them, the more they're learning how to pass all the assessments for some of the world's largest employers. So all of a sudden, you have at the very front end of your funnel, people with entirely fraudulent resumes being pushed to the front of the queue and then being assessed, but then passing those assessments with flying colors because they're not actually the person sitting the assessment. Then you will either at stage 2 or even before that, you may have conducted the first round of interview. And most interviews are now in the form that we're all talking today, right? They're all online in one of the popular tools like Zoom, Teams, or Google Meet. And it's very easy now to download programs into those applications that you can't see as the interviewer, but they will be providing a script to the person on the screen. And so that's really easy for them to sound like they have the skills to be, for example, a tech developer, when actually they have absolutely none of the skill required to do that job. We did some testing and we downloaded some of those programs into our tool and we practiced with it. And it was pretty indistinguishable that we were reading from a script and we could pass an interview with no experience of being a tech developer. So that was quite surprising to us. The other thing that we're going to show you in one of the next slides is actually the rise of deepfake. And Will, you showed earlier on some of the news articles. Some of the strongest news articles are saying that this is the largest area of increase in fraud in recruitment and background screening is the rise of deepfake. And so I'll show you a video in a minute that will probably surprise some of you as to how sophisticated the deepfake has become. It's purely undetectable to the human eye whether that person is actually the person you think you're interviewing. Then we talk about background checking, or we talk about the identity verification stage. Background checking previously used to be conducted once you had offered someone the job, they'd signed the contract, you begin background checking. But what we're seeing now is that stage needs to move further up the recruitment, the onboarding funnel, because the attacking is actually happening far before you actually call to take someone's references or check their qualifications. You can't trust anything above the application process, so it's quite scary. The identity verification stage is also something that's exploding. It's very easy, for example, to use deepfake to pass some of the not quite right biometric ID checking systems. We've seen that deepfake can pass some of those, and we also saw a recent news article where a Polish engineer created an entirely fake Polish passport using ChatGPT. And this was published in the media, so you can find that article. But the article was reporting that it passed KYC verification processes. And so there was quite a lot of uproar about that article because ChatGPT restricts you from creating a document like that. But his point was, if you prompt enough and you know how to use it enough, you could create a passport. And he did that. And then he went on to show how it passed a verification process. So this is where we really sort of want to highlight to people, when we talk about the AI disruption in background checking, it has more than disrupted it. It has really transformed the conversation when we talk about background checking. And what you do about that is probably one of the bigger questions, which we're going to go on to talk about with you. But firstly, we wanted to make sure that the people on the call today were really understanding how much AI has disrupted, the background check conversation. Well, what's the next slide? Yeah. So this is where I thought it could be interesting. I know we're a smaller group, so I don't know if we need to do a micro breakout. I wonder if we could just open up the conversation to the group about whether that was news to you, which part of that AI fraud journey that we've just spoken about resonates with you, with your program. What would you like to talk about in regard to what we've sort of already shown you today? So Jeff, I don't know what the best way to do that would be, because I see we're a smaller group. Should we do breakouts, or do we think we could just have a chat?
We can do that. We can have a chat here. I see someone has already, turned her camera on. So,
Okay.
We can do it here.
Yeah.
If you want.
Yeah, I think, because we are a smaller group, it could just be interesting to throw that question out to everyone. Because often when we show this part in a webinar, it's good conversation that comes out. So yeah, I'd be interested to see what people's thoughts, comments, or questions are.
Leanne, you want to chime in? We can. Can you guys hear Leanne?
No, I can't.
Okay.
Leanne, I think we're having the audio issue that we had last week or 2 weeks ago. So Nancy chimed in that fake profiles are a bit of an issue.
Yeah, and that's sort of just that. That's interesting because that points to what we're talking about. People can create entirely fake personas online now with very plausible information that looks like it backs that up, if that makes sense. Which is why we say that AI has really disrupted the background check conversation, because you need to be aware of what other tools are available to you to spot those fake profiles, because they're being created on an industrial scale in some instances.
Yeah, and then Ron also chimed in fake credential, also was surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah, the really interesting thing with the credentials is whether it's, asking ChatGPT to create a document for you, or even with a tool like Canva, you don't need a subscription to Photoshop like you would 10 years ago to, go in and have expert level knowledge of how to edit a document. It's become very, very easy to doctor a document that looks real to the naked eye.
I have a question. Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Natasha. I just have a question. If you have some tips perhaps for internal recruitment teams on maybe the initial stage when people are faking the companies that they worked at that perhaps don't even exist, or maybe they do exist, but they weren't really there. I think the obvious one of the tips would be like do the reference check right away. But are you seeing that? Is that happening like way up at the top, or are there other suggestions that you might have for the recruitment team to know, this is a verified person? Because I would only imagine that, you could simply do a Google search and find that company, and then there's like another fake profile saying that it is real, and like what do you do?
Yeah, exactly right. That's a really good question. So to answer your question, yeah, we are seeing people looking for different ways to attack this further up what I would call the recruitment and the hiring funnel. And so there's lots of different ways. Some organizations, and I know you need to remain competitive in your recruitment market, but some of them will require you to do a biometric ID check as part of your application process, or they will put on their job applications that you may be required to do that. So that immediately is a deterrent for some of these fraudsters, because they realize, oh, actually, we could possibly be checked here. With the rise of digital access exploding around the world as well, some organizations are also going a little bit further than that. They are looking at taxation records as part of someone's application. So you need to evidence that you have worked at, for example, Bank of America for 10 years as part of your application process. That could be before interview, after the second interview, before job offer. So yes, there are definitely tools that are available to help with that. There are also document fraud tools. So you might require someone to upload evidence of their most recent employment. It could be the most recent payslip or something like that. And the AI tool would evidence whether that document is likely to be legitimate. So there's sort of different products that are coming out when we talk about background checking that are not just the traditional, I'm going to call to take a reference, because we know we can't probably trust if we call to take that reference a lot of the time as well.
Thank you. That was great.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, can hear you.
Yeah, okay, awesome. My question is more around, you were talking about that passport, like they created like a fake passport. So here's my question, is like, if that's not being caught, I mean, I could make a fake T4 or a fake pay stub. Like, I mean, with the most basic of programs, I can do that. What are these background checks? And I've always wondered this, and maybe you'll be comfortable sharing, but like, what are these background check companies actually verifying against? Because if a passport is not being flagged as fraudulent, then my question is, are they just looking at papers and saying, oh, that kind of looks reasonable?
That's a good question. I mean, Will, I don't want to say, I don't know if you want to answer that, or you're happy for me.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to jump in there. I mean, really,
yeah.
I think the shift that we've seen in terms of how we're processing or how we're collecting, analyzing this sort of documents is that there's a lot of high tech data that we're using in terms of verifying that document in real time. And so really it's other companies that we partner with that specialize in document verification, but it's basically, you know, if it's a W-2 in the US, it's comparing a W-2 against every W-2 that the system's ever analyzed. So often it's really small differences in terms of, you know, how historical documents have been formatted in the past.
So it's not actually verifying anything. It's just saying, oh, this looks like a passport. It has all the features of a passport. So we're saying this is a passport.
It depends on the document type. So ID documents are usually easier. It's feasible to verify at the source. But something like tax records, there might not be a national repository to go back and verify directly with an agency. So I think that depending on the use case, it can be, you know, verifying an ID at the source, or sometimes it's looking and making sure that, you know, if it's a Bank of America statement, that it has that, you know, unique bespoke font that Bank of America uses.
And to take that a bit further as well. So now often the background check company will do a biometric ID check for you. So that's different. That is, and that sounds more complicated than what it is. That person is taking a live selfie of their face. So it's a snapshot of a video. And then you will upload a photo of your passport or your driver's license or something like that. And then there is a system that is analyzing the biometrics of your face, whether it matches the photo. But then it does also go back and check that this is a valid, in-date, legitimate passport issued from that country. So you've got a range of checks that are being done. And then what Will is mentioning is that those other checks are on top of that. So you kind of need a range of checks now to make sure 100% that is a real ID document, or that is a real person. One of the things, and we might show you this in a minute, but one of the things we're seeing at the moment, because deepfake is exploding, is there are AI programs that could, for example, assess you and I right now and look for the blood vessels in your face. Because if you're wearing an AI mask, you'll have no blood vessels in your face. So that to me is, I mean, how are we even talking about that when we talk about background checking? But that is why we say AI is disrupting this conversation, because it's not just we're taking a reference or we're checking your qualifications. In fact, we don't want to do that anymore, because we know that could all be completely fraudulent. We need to look for other ways to make sure that we know who we're hiring, if that makes sense.
Are there any sort of key indicators in the earlier stages? Like, you know, if I have a concern, I'll usually have someone like hold up like 4 fingers in front of their face and move them around. Like, you know, we do things like that. But what are some of the, and I'll be honest, I haven't dealt with a lot of fraudulent applicants. And I can only say that with certainty because I've seen what other people are getting. And to me, I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years, so it's super obvious. Like, it's just so obvious to me. But what are some of the key indicators that, you know, people can take back to their TA teams that maybe they can't put into words, and maybe their TAs are like, you know, a year to 5 years into the business and don't have that, you know, 25 years of experience? What are some of the things that they can take away and teach to be aware of and to look for to try to help bring down?
That's what we're going to cover that the rest of our time together. That's exactly what we're going to show. So, well, maybe we just, I mean, I'm not sure if anyone else has any other comments. We're going to have more time, but what we might do is just move on from the section and then allow to, because I think we're going to explain a little bit more. Because this is really, it's a nice lead into what we would talk about. You know, we've sort of shown you the risk a little bit, but now we need to talk about what you should focus on. And we recommend that there are 4 key areas that you should focus on. So we're going to talk about those a little bit. The first one is product. We've already started to have that conversation with you here today, understanding the different types of products, you know, that are available in the market. You need to make sure that you have an effective background check policy. You need to make sure that your processes are working. There's a lot of mention on this call about turnaround time. So if your process doesn't work properly, you're going to have problems with turnaround time. And you also need to work with an effective background check provider who can provide you all of the services you need to protect your organization. So we're going to talk more about that. Will, maybe if we jump to the next slide. This is where we put up on the screen some of the most common background check products that are available out there. So some of these you will recognize, some of them maybe you won't, some of them won't be appropriate to the type of people that you hire. But this is really the first step that we would recommend if you're thinking about your own organization today. This is where you should put some focus, understand the different types of products that are available out there when we talk about background checking. And there's more than even what we put on the screen, but you certainly can't begin to fully, I think in today's world, in today's AI-driven world, you can't really protect your organization if you're not fully sure about what are the background checks in the market. And also if you don't understand the risks that they are designed to protect you from, or, you know, to mitigate. So that's why we firstly start with product. Well, maybe we jump, I wanted to talk about one of the products because we were just talking about this, so it's quite interesting. One of the slides we put up here was identity, and making sure that you have an understanding of identity. So on the screen here, you can see that's deepfake. So that lady on the bottom screen is using a mask that looks like the person that is the bigger person on the screen. Now, to me, you cannot tell that those are deepfakes. And so if someone on your team, if you're a recruiter, if you're an onboarder, if you were interviewing the blonde lady on that screen, you're going to have no idea that that is a deepfake. This was quite surprising to me, which is why we're showing this video to a lot of people at the moment, because that's how far advanced deepfakes have become. And so this video sort of keeps going, and it can keep playing while we're chatting. I don't know if it's not liking it, Will, but
It's buffering.
yeah, it's buffering. Well, there you go. But yeah, normally when we show this video, it is surprising to people because I think people are not really fully understanding how advanced deepfake has become, which is why one of the news articles that we showed you earlier is the media is reporting that this is one of the largest growth areas of hiring for, which is deepfake. And even that short video that you were able to see, I think will have shown a lot of you it's indistinguishable to the human eye now, which is why people are wanting to have conversations with us. They're like, what do we do about that? And so what we're beginning to see, for example, in that scenario, is people having to record all of the interviews that they're conducting, and they are uploading those interviews into AI programs, and those AI programs are assessing whether that's likely to be a deepfake. And you know, we just mentioned they're looking for things like blood vessels in the face. They're looking at, you know, lots of different things that an AI platform knows to look for that a human eye doesn't know to look for. So maybe we can keep going because I think that's probably not going to show. But this was another poll that we were going to ask. I think it could be interesting, Jeff, maybe we do put this up on the screen, because what we find in these conversations, because already we've spoken a little bit about documentation fraud checks today, we've spoken about deepfake, we haven't spoken a lot yet about social media today, but that's also a very common growth check that people are using when they're trying to protect their organizations. But it could also be interesting to just get a poll going. Do people know, what do you know least about from those checks there? Do you know anything about social media? Or, so you've got B and C, yeah, deepfake and social media. Yeah, all. It's interesting. Yeah, and because these are the new checks that you would want to be aware of, if that makes sense. How do you make sure that if your teams are running background checking, if you've just got a team of people that are dealing with any form of documentation, they will be dealing with fraudulent documents in today's world, without a doubt. So you need to understand what you could do about that. And the answer is that you need to be using AI to combat AI. Deepfake, you need to really be aware that you cannot trust that the person that you're interviewing is actually the person you think you're interviewing. I'm hearing more and more stories about this, especially with remote roles, or even people that are hiring people into like maybe call center roles where they're joining a big group on day one. And what they discovered just by mistake was that the manager who had interviewed people, there was totally different people in the room that had turned up on day one. And they went back and looked at it all, and there were deepfake videos. Other people were sitting there interview for them and lots of stuff. And then social media checks, we talk about this here because social media checks, that term needs to be changed and is changing. That needs to be online behavior check. And it's amazing what you can discover about the person you're hiring by looking at the online digital footprint and the way that they're behaving online as well. So maybe we, just in the interest of time, keep going. So that feeds nicely into making sure that you have a solid, background check policy in place. If you don't have a strong background check policy in place that is addressing the conversation that we've started having today, then you will have lots of gaps where people are getting through your background check program. So you can see on the screen there, you're setting your company standard, you're maintaining trust, you're acting consistently, you're applying with local laws and rules, but you're also keeping up with the new AI risks because you're looking at your policy and maybe figuring out where you may have gaps. Well, we can probably keep going. The other slide there is the one, then I'll hand back to you. But this is what I'm discovering, or we're discovering in the industry. There's a really uncomfortable truth. Most organizations do have background check policies that they look good on paper, they're meeting compliance expectations, but they're not actually working. They collapse under the scenarios, for example, that we're even discussing with you today, which is why we recommend you start with understanding your background check products, then you dig into your background check policy and make that work for you. And then, I think I'll hand over to you here, which is where we talk about, moving into looking at your processes.
Yeah, great. So Anton's really set the stage there in terms of, there's obviously a lot of products that you could enlist within that screening process. There's a lot of new products that are kind of coming down the line. The importance of setting the policies related to those, but it really means nothing without a sound process to help guide it. And so this seems simple, but it can really quickly fall apart, as people leave the organization, new people join, maybe existing team members shift in responsibilities. What we're looking at ultimately is, alignment across your team of who controls which steps. So making sure that each risk has a control against it. And really, most importantly, each decision can be explained. So I guess that ability or inability to track decision-making errors can be really costly, especially when you have that turnover in the organization. So you have that process that should really be linked to those 4 Ps that Anton mentioned earlier around, product, process, policy, and provider. And that takes us to the last one, which is really the provider that you're using. So one thing that Jeff asked me to do before this session was really, I guess, to tell a story about how Checkmate is helping companies strengthen their compliance. And there's probably 2 examples that I thought would be relevant to share, just specifically with kind of this AI disruption topic that we're speaking about. The first is around identity verification. So last year, Checkmate made an organizational decision to include ID verification, biometric ID verification as a default, basically for every candidate going through a background screening process, and that came at no additional cost. And the main purpose around that was really kind of an internal initiative on our end to catch fraudulent activity as early as we can for our clients. And so what that ID verification actually involves is that's basically like a biometric selfie liveness test. So that's, I don't know if anyone on this call has been through that before, but that's when you're holding your phone up to your face, looking up, blinking, turning your head left. And so that basically is matching the candidate in real time to the ID that they've uploaded. And then additionally, we're taking that ID and we're putting it through a document verification tool. So again, in real time, confirming that this person has a valid ID, they are who they say they are. The other thing that I thought would be helpful to just kind of touch on is across the board, 1.9% of our candidates globally, going through a background screening process with Checkmate are exhibiting fraudulent behavior. And so that could be IP address matching with online reference checking. That could be using a false ID, using fake employment details, doctoring education details. It seems like a really low number, that 1.9%, but that's ultimately saying that 1 in 50 of your candidates are lying. And the interesting thing is it's much higher in blue collar and youth organizations. And so I guess really kind of the key takeaway here is that it's getting easier and easier to falsify different parts of this process. And so that's, a little bit what we're speaking about, kind of the importance of staying on top of some of these new threats and how you can stay across them. So I guess, somewhat wrapping this up, really the things that we think are most important to get right in 2026 are really just identity and digital behavior. Using those biometric checks, that digital ID to help catch fraudsters as they're coming through your pipeline. Direct data access and smarter control and escalation, that kind of goes into the policy and the process part there, just making sure that, you have a set policy around how you're going to control some of these events that may come up. And then just being aware of, I guess, all the different, the new ways that people are faking their way through this process. So whether that's, deep fake in a video interview, these AI generated applications and CVs, and, the fake IDs that are getting easier and easier to create. And so we don't necessarily need to run through this whole 10-point framework right now on the call, but this is something that we can share after the fact if anyone's interested. In best practice framework towards putting an attack plan in place for this.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
I guess I can.
Right on time.
Okay.
What's the end game?
Sorry.
What's the end game for these people? Like, at some point, they have to provide a social insurance number or a social security number in order to get paid. Like, what's the end game here? How does this?
It's a good question. You're getting you're getting industrial espionage happening. You're getting some countries that are deliberately targeting major organizations to place people in there for the wrong reasons. That's where this conversation really began. But now you are just getting people that are desperate for work, and so the risk more is that you could be getting completely unskilled people in your organization that are not able to do the job that they're able to do, or yes, you've got fraudulent, complete the wrong person in your organization. So they could be bypassing and using someone's different social. It might not be the person you think you're paying. So that's what we're beginning to see. So that's really the risk, and that mix is really beginning to change from really industrial espionage to actually people sitting at home that have been out of work for a very long time that are able to get further and further into people's hiring processes and then become an employer and then become the problem for the employer. That's what we're beginning to see.
I have another
So they're
question.
real, they're just faking. Okay.
Yeah, that's often
not necessarily always completely fake people.
Yeah, they just don't have the skills or the knowledge or experience. So the example we gave you earlier, I created an entirely fake profile for myself as a full tech stack developer. I don't know what that is, but was really terrified as to how far I could get into the process. I probably could have got a job. And if I was working remotely, you would have been paying me for a month before you realized that I can't do the job. And that's what we're seeing people doing. So, they're chancing it, they're making money, and then they get caught, they just go on and do it somewhere else. So that's the terrifying reality that we are seeing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I have examples from companies I've worked for where that happened, where people having multiple, those people also having multiple jobs, and then them just not being responsive at a certain point.
Yeah. I was at an event earlier this morning, and they were talking about someone that they found a person in the company had 3 jobs at the same time. And the only way they found out was actually looking at the taxation records. So they were doing the job, but they were working for competitors. They were working for the direct competitor doing the same role. So it was, and you would never have been able to know that 10 years ago because you wouldn't have had taxation records, but that's how they found that scenario, which is incredible.
Natasha had a question, and then there's 2 questions, that I want to get to that sort of pop up earlier, but go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I've been reading a lot about verified human or proof of personhood label, similar to what Instagram is doing when they verify a business or a public person. Have you seen this in reference checks as well?
Yes, I mean, so the answer is yes, and there's a lot of people that are trying to do that. So that would even go to the conversation about digital wallet, right? So that you would, you might verify Anton's background once, and then you put it into a wallet, and then you can use that information. So yes, that there is a lot of conversation going around about that, but the issue is that's all open to fraud as well. So the real conversation is more around the direct access to data, so more digital access to data. So we think you're going to see a little bit of both, but it's more you're looking for different data points to really prove that that person is who they say they are and that they have the skill in the job that they need. And so we're seeing 2 shifts. There's a school of thought that it'll be digital wallet, and then there's a school of thought that'll just be instant data access. And we're seeing things like even LinkedIn beginning to move to that. Now you can verify your profile and stuff like that. So yes, there's going to be a shift in that way. I'm just not sure yet how that will actually play out in reality.
Very interesting. Okay, so thank you for that question. So there's a question earlier from Alana. She asked, so I'm curious about tools out there that signal AI use throughout the hiring journey. I think we've already talked a bit about that, but that's the question maybe you want to get into.
Yeah, so I guess the question, Jeff, is more like if people are using AI in the process, how do you begin to discover that? Yeah, and so, I mean, the really unusual answer or simple answer to that is you've got to use AI to combat bad AI. So we say at the moment, use good AI to combat bad AI, because humans don't know a lot about when someone's using AI. We're not trained enough to spot that. Although we're beginning to. So you can notice things like the long dashes. If someone's using a long dash, they probably haven't written what they're writing. If the language is not as they're speaking to you in the written assessment, that's probably not that person. And it also uses language that a human sometimes doesn't use. So there's certain tips that you can begin to teach your teams, but in reality, you need to be looking for AI tools that could assess the parts of your program that could be being taken advantage of, if that makes sense.
Thank you for that. So Alana, do you have any follow-up on that, or is that okay?
No follow-up, I guess. Just, is there any specific, like when you're using good AI to combat bad AI, is there specific tools that you've used that you would recommend?
Yeah, yes, I mean, I could, and maybe this is what Checkmate could also share with you, but what we're beginning to see, I guess a little bit more generically, is we're beginning to see a change in the way that people are hiring. So, they're looking for more behavioral type questions up front, and they're looking for AI programs to maybe do that before you even get further in the process. So you'll upload the resume will be assessed by AI for the use of AI in creating that resume, and looking for things like hidden messages to put it to the front of the queue. So that's one thing that we're definitely seeing. And then you would maybe speak to an AI program before you spoke to a human. So you look at L'Oreal. L'Oreal is doing this at the moment, where you speak to 2 or 3 different chatbots before you get to a human, and that's assessing whether you have the skill a lot of the time for the role, whether you're going to be a fit to the organization. It's a bit of a gray area, but yes, we're beginning to see that kind of happening. And then we're seeing things like, for example, documentation fraud tools. Maybe you ask them to upload their pay stub, and there'll be an AI tool that'll be assessing the legitimacy of that document, if that makes sense. And then you're seeing biometric ID. So there are those very specific tools. There's a lot of them out there now. I think that's where provider comes in. You need to partner with someone like Checkmate, who would send you in the right direction to the right reputable tool that you can use. Because in the beginning, we showed you, I don't know if you saw that, but there's a case going on in the US between Workday and Mobley, because they brought in an AI program, and the AI program discriminated against one person. He applied for 150 roles, I think, and within 3 seconds, he was declined for every role within 3 seconds. So he took them to court, and they discovered that the AI program was racist and ageist. So that's what I mean. That's why I don't want to recommend any specific tools at this point. I think that's where your partner, like someone like Checkmate, would maybe be able to advise you based on where you are and what you're looking for, where you might want to focus a little bit.
Yeah, Alana, I'll connect with you later today, and there's a few cool examples that I've found earlier this year. Both of their names are slipping my head right now. Terrible with names, but yeah, I'll connect with you after this and share those.
So and to chime in quickly about that. And so obviously I work with a lot of up and coming HR tech companies. And so two things that pop up. One is there are lots of tools out there, and I'm actually in the process. I'm actually writing a post about that. But there are tools that can actually verify on the assessment part of things. And so now obviously companies are doing a lot more assessment online, using video and so forth. And the tools can actually detect if there's, cheating going on, fake, all of that kind of stuff. So there's that use case. The other one is actually on the interview itself. And so that's obviously done either if it's a real-time video or if it's a recorded video. So there are solutions. That's been around for a while, but I think now they're now able to determine if it's fake or there's some oddities about the actual video itself. And so they are coming out. There are a lot of startups. I've chatted with a whole bunch of them recently, and they're all over the world. I think the issue is confusion, obviously, with all of you, but they are there. And so I'm going to publish something about that. But obviously, to Anton point, I mean, obviously Checkmate, had a good pulse on it, also. I just want to get to one other question in the chat before I get back to Leanne. So Ron had a really good question about, do open banking verification tools allow employment verification without sharing salary amounts?
Yeah, and so the answer is yes, they do. And so those programs can cause a lot of discomfort, right? But in the UK market, where I'm based, this has exploded right now. So most people now are not doing employment verification. They are doing it's a particular tool that's available here, and they look at 3 data points. They look at open banking, payroll records, and taxation records. And within seconds, they can tell where that person has worked for the last 6-year period. And so, and we were wondering as an industry here how many people would connect to this, and it's staggering. People are connecting to all 3 of those data sources. But you have to give them comfort around the way it's done. It's going in and looking for that data. It's not reporting salary and stuff like that. It's just looking for the name of the employer and the dates that you might have been paid. And then it collates that and says, Anton worked at Bank of America for the last 6 years. We can see the dates that the salary went in there. And then they go to the payroll provider who payrolls Bank of America, and they indicate that Anton was there for that period of time. And then they look at the taxation records, because you can't fake a taxation record. And so that gives you an immediate snapshot of the person's real work history. But what it's also showing, which no one really thought would happen, it's also showing extra employments that no one had any idea these people were also doing. So you then have a really interesting conversation with Anton and say, well, you also worked at 2 other companies that you didn't tell us about. So that could also be quite enlightening. It's giving you a bit more of a better picture about the person. But more importantly, it's also doing it very quickly. So you're not waiting days for a reference. You've actually got some of the key data within seconds. And so I think you're going to see that continue to move around the world, because people are becoming more comfortable with digital access to data as long as it's done properly.
Well, that's actually part of my question, which is it's all well and good if your country has open banking. It's all well and good if your country doesn't try to police every single piece of financial data. But as and I'm guessing just from the names that I can see up here, the majority of us on this call are Canadian, where we do not have open banking. We do not have any right to ask for a T4, anything that can help us, like
Yeah, what do you do? I like the question.
What do we do?
Yeah.
Or how do we, like, and not that you guys are lobbyists, but like, is this something we have to start lobbying for
I think
in
so.
the open banking conversation?
Yeah, I think so, and it is beginning to happen slowly around the world, because they're seeing it used in other locations, and they're beginning to see the changes that it's making.
Well, I mean, they've been seeing open banking for years, and they still haven't.
It's slow. I feel your pain. I think that's where you would want to look again. Work with people, like your Checkmate or your background check provider, to understand the products that are now available and where. So, for example, I guess what I'm saying is, if you're running traditional background checks right now, they may not be appropriate for the risks, and you might better make it quicker and faster and easier for you. One of those, in my mind, and a very contentious check, is social media. We don't call it that. We call it an online behavior, an online signal check. You can also find out about people's employment from their social media search, but you have to understand how that works. You're not looking at whether Anton was in the pub last night and fell out the door. That's not going to be reported to you. It's very stringent. It looks for racism, bullying, sex, all of that sort of stuff, and then it reports it back to the employer if it's appropriate. But a lot of people don't know that, so they're really scared of that particular check. But that's one of the world's largest growing checks, and it actually helps with a lot of what we're talking about today, or documentation fraud checking. So, checking if you're having to rely on a document and you can request it in your location, are you checking it? It's not an expensive check, and that would give you, again, much more comfort around that person. That has he really worked at Bank of America, for how long? And you just pair that with a biometric ID check, and you start to have a different picture of the person you're hiring. But what it's not always giving you is whether they have the skills that they need, and that's why I say we talk more about assessments now. And AI is helping to assess people a lot quicker than a human can, and more effectively. And that's, I think, what Jeff is talking about as well. So that's why we say the whole purpose of today was that AI disruption in background checking. It's changed the conversation about background checking. And we shouldn't just be talking to you about, have you checked Anton's references and his qualifications? To your point, we want to have a different conversation that works for how you're hiring with the risks that you're being faced with, I guess.
So we're at 2 minutes left, and so I just want to end off, and so I don't want this to end our conversation at all. And so we'll be going out tomorrow with the post webinar recap with the recording and a bunch of other goodies and so forth. But I'll also share how to contact both Will and Anton as well. I'm sure they would love to hear from you. And so I just want to thank both Anton and Will for being here. I mean, I learned a ton. Obviously, this is what it's all about. And I know that this is probably one of the most engaging ones that we've done. And I know it because people are, very concerned about this topic. So without further ado, thank you both for being here. There are going to be other webinars coming up next month, April and May, and also June as well. So then you can go to the ScaleHR website, go ScaleHR.com. and just click on the events tab. Then you'll see all of the other webinars on there. And so stay tuned for tomorrow. I'll send you all an email with all of the links and goodies. And so thank you all for being here.
Perfect.
So thank you both.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for the participation. It was great.
Perfect. See you later.
Have a great day.
Everyone.